Well, alrighty, gang, welcome back to the Gutowski Files, starring our very own Stephen Gutowski. He is the owner and editor and lead writer over at thereload.com. If you haven't already, go over to thereload.com.
BakerTargets.com is where I get the targets you see me shoot all the time on Active Self-Protection Extra. They ship fast, their prices are great, and they have all kinds of targets, both for competitive shooting, defensive shooting, and fun too. Check them out.
Consider getting a membership. Stephen does rely on his membership dues to fund his important work. Stephen, how are you?
Doing good. Our annual or our anniversary sale is ending soon, so it's a particularly good time to buy a membership. But yeah, I'm doing well. How are you?
Absolutely, I'm doing well. So I have an exclusive here just for our app folks. If you can see this. This is a review, probably backwards, but it does spell out Gutowski. So there are people listening to the end. I had another episode where the code word was Boca Raton, and someone did leave a review with that. So the retention is good, is what I'm trying to say. That's a good thing. But I've been asked more than once to please treat hair talk like sports talk and just put it at the end if you're going to discuss hair. But
the people demand that we do more of that at the end of the show. Just they love the hair talk. That's why we're getting those comments at the end.
I think so too. So if you will remind me at the end before I cut it too short, we want to talk about hair. I really don't want to talk about hair because I don't have any. We will talk about, however, is a story over at The Reload. This is by contributing writer Jake Fogelman. Is that his correct title?
Yes.
Contributing writer. Okay.
Yeah. Contributing writer.
It is entitled Fifth Circuit Upholds Enhanced, that's in quotes, enhanced gun background checks for young adults. So this is basically for the people who are over 18 but under 21. So anybody over 21, that's pretty well established how that's going to work. So where and what was the difference between an adult background check and someone who falls in this sort of narrow 2 to 3 year window, Stephen?
Yeah, well, this all stems from the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act that people might remember from 2022, which was the big gun bill that Congress passed and the president signed in response to the Uvalde shooting. And part of that bill had a section that changed the way the National Instant Criminal Background Check system works, but only specifically for this age group that we're talking about here. And so it added these quote unquote enhanced background checks. And primarily what they require is that the FBI, when it conducts a background check on you when you go to buy a gun, someone in this age group, they have to go and make contact with local law enforcement and local mental health services from where you live or grew up in order to see if there are any records that haven't been properly reported to the regular system. Because when you go into a store and you do that background check, what it's doing is querying databases, right? There's databases of all the criminal records and mental health records that disqualify people from owning guns in the United States. And it's just doing, as a search, like you would kind of like Google or, what have you. It's a little bit different, obviously, but that's the basic concept. Now, obviously, there have been problems with these databases in the past in that they haven't always included all the records because some states don't report all the records. Military branches haven't reported all the records they're supposed to in the past. That was the Sutherland Springs shooting or the Virginia Tech shooting. These all had circumstances where the records that would disqualify someone from owning a gun didn't make it to the system. And so Uvalde happened. The shooter there was very young and had a questionable background, although I don't think he had any actual disqualifying records. Because again, for somebody to be prohibited from owning guns under federal law, there has to actually be a record of them either being involuntarily committed or committing a felony that they've been convicted for or are being charged in the process of being charged for. Those sort of things have to actually happen. So people just saying they heard a shooter say crazy things or make threats or stuff, which is more what happened with the Uvalde shooter. I don't believe there are any disqualifying records. But regardless, that sort of was the catalyst for this. And so there's this new process. And the biggest issue that a lot of gun rights advocates have with this new process, and what led to this case in particular, is that the new process includes essentially 10 days where the the FBI can investigate your background if you're 18 to 21. And it's just sort of a de facto waiting period. Like they just get 10 days to look for these records. And unlike you or I, anyone over 21 who went into a store to buy a gun and went through the background check system, you can be delayed under the regular system, right? But you can only be delayed for up to 3 days, and then they have to allow the sale to process. And later on, if they figure out that you're prohibited, they can come and they can send the ATF to come and collect your guns that you bought illegally, but and maybe charge you perhaps in that circumstance. But the real sticking point here again is that 10-day window where the ATF or the FBI can just delay these checks for 10 days. They can take those full 10 days with no sort of repercussions for that. And obviously gun rights advocates had complained that this was sort of a de facto waiting period for people who are 18 to 20.
Yeah, I guess my next question would be, you said reach out to like local law enforcement. So for example, so would the applicant have to do that? Or is this a period of time where the FBI can contact, the Smithville PD and make sure they haven't had any adverse contacts? And do you know offhand what would necessitate a denial, or what would precipitate a denial on the part of the FBI? For example, if the kid, let's say, had made a threat on social media 2 years ago that he never followed up on, is that something that could disqualify him or her from obtaining that firearm?
No, it's essentially the same list of prohibiting factors. Other than the one expansion they made in that law, in the 2022 law, was what people had called the boyfriend loophole. So, if you've committed domestic violence misdemeanor, you're barred for life from owning guns, similar to if you commit a felony, if you're convicted, right? And the one complaint that people had with that prohibition, or one of the sticking points around that, was what people call the boyfriend loophole, which was essentially the definition of what domestic violence is. There was an issue with that. So the federal definition for a long time was just people who have either been married or had children together or were otherwise related, or that lived together for a long period of time, cohabitation, right? And so if none of those factors came into play, for instance, a boyfriend situation where you're not living with the boyfriend, the misdemeanor violence act in that case wouldn't be caught up in this prohibition. So that's one thing they changed with this law too. Like if you commit a violent misdemeanor against a dating partner, you would now be caught up in this definition. That applies to everyone, though. That's not age gated like the other issue. So essentially, for 18 to 20-year-olds, they're still looking for basically the same kind of records that you've been involuntarily committed, perhaps when you were not an adult. Yeah. Some states don't report those records, or they get sealed. It's not entirely clear how, to me, at this point, how that interacts when they do these checks. But it is the FBI checking, so it's not, the buyer isn't doing anything in this case. The FBI is going out and looking for these records, and they're looking for things like involuntary commitments, or maybe a juvenile record that might disqualify somebody under federal law, where maybe the state has a different view of how that interacts. So there haven't been a ton of these yet. According to the FBI, earlier this year, they said there have been about 600 cases where somebody was denied under this law because of the additional document search aspect to it. And it's not clear what exactly the documents were, if they should have been in the system but weren't, or how exactly how that worked. There's still some uncertainty on that front. But yeah, that was the basic way that this bill works. And the legal issue at play was this de facto waiting period that was created for 18 to 20-year-olds. And so the Fifth Circuit in this case, a panel, 3-judge panel, there had already been a ruling against the gun rights advocates at the lower court level, the district court, And the panel, and this is for a preliminary injunction, so to try and block the law before you get to the merits argument. And so it's a little bit higher bar to reach. You have to show that you're likely to win on the merits. Although, I've always found that, like, if a court doesn't think you're likely to win on the merits to give you a preliminary injunction, you're probably not going to win on the merits then
right.
later on.